Hey guys, welcome to the Machine Translation Summit. We're in the Helix in Dublin and we have a lovely program, discuss tons of interesting things. So bear with me for this video because we'll go over some of the takeaways we can get from this summit. See you in a bit. So, like I said in the intro, that was really interesting. And if you remember, a couple of years ago, I released a video talking about some of the possible ways MT could influence things. And here we are just a couple of years back, and we already see like big changes taking place in the industry. So I came back to this river to talk to you about this. When I was over there, I thought about all the translators, and I said, well, we really need to talk about what is happening and how MT is reshaping some segments of the language industry. So here we go. We'll be discussing that in 6 aspects, and I hope the wind will be okay with us, and I'll get started right now. So machine translation as a new technology is really now finding its place in many workflows when we talk about languages and translation. And it is important to know what is happening, and that will be very useful information for all the translators and LSPs that are watching this video and that are watching my channel. Now, in this video, I will not discuss futuristic aspects. I will discuss what is happening as we speak right now, Q3 2019, and what will come out maybe Q4 2019, Q1 2020. So things that are happening right now or that will be happening in a very close future. So let's get started with our first point. Now, machine translation, they depend very much to be effective on the amount of data that is available in a specific language pair. So language pairs that have vast amounts of data available to train machine translation engines, the engines in those languages will be performing very well. So that would be, for example, English to French, English to German, English to Spanish, English to Portuguese, and vice versa. So all these languages will have very effective engines available for programmers to make them. Now, if you are translating from Kyrgyz to Quechua, well, I don't think you will encounter very much machine translation in your work as a translator for yet a few years. So what we'll be discussing in this video will not affect languages that have not enough data available for it to make sense in a production scenario to use machine translation, because machine translation would be too bad and efforts to correct the output wouldn't make sense from an economical standpoint. So this video is only to talk about MT engines that have big amounts of data. Now on to the second aspect. Machine translation do perform better in some domains than in others. So for example, for machine translation, translating something like patents would be something rather easy, and machine translation will perform well. But now if machine translation has to tackle poems or transcreation or marketing, things where a lot of idiomatic expressions are used, or you really need like to have something that is easily readable and understandable to folks, well, that won't make sense. They won't perform as well as need be. So they will not be considered in the discussion we have today about MT reshaping some segments of the industry. So really, we will now focus on parts where machine translation is in a language where it performs very well, and what's in a domain where it performs very well. Now, a segment of the market where we see machine translation growing at a very fast rate is translation as a service. So let's say, for example, you want to translate something very short from your smartphone. well, you can use every sort of plugin there is, or you can access just Google Translate, DeepL, whichever you like. But these things now are very common. You even have some, for example, things in Skype, where you can use Skype Translator. And now, if you're using Microsoft Office, you can see that in Microsoft Word, now at just clicking on a button, you will have your selection or your whole document translated. So this approach is extremely practical for people that don't have high quality needs in what they need to have translated, or something that they just need to translate one thing for one day occasionally. So they would not go to Translator to translate that small text. It used to be the case in the past. Sometimes they would have to approach a translator for a small segment of information, but if they can live with small mistakes that machine translation will make in that process, well, they will be able to get that very comfortably from their phone, from their desktop, sometimes for free, or as included in a package, as it's in the case of Microsoft Office. So folks would tend to use that more than just going to a translator for a small job. Now, of course, this means that some small jobs that in the past were used by new translators to try to make a reputation for themselves, they will no longer be available in that way, because people will just find it easier to use that from a computer or a smartphone. Now, we're coming to our fourth point. Let's talk about something that may be new to you, voice morphing apps. So let's say somebody wants to be able to talk with somebody else, either by video messaging, or maybe video conferencing, or maybe just use an interpreter. They would have that need. And if you're not the European Parliament, to be honest, it is not super easy to get an interpreter to work with you. Or you can do it, or you can do over the phone interpreting or that sort of things. But now there are developments where this type of interpreting can come to your phone. So in that scenario, you would have somebody that is just recording a voice message on the phone. The message is transcripted. The transcription is sent to the MT provider, which instantly translates the text into the target language, and the targeted text is then pushed to a human translator that edits it, sends it back. The machine then creates a voice rendering of the translated text, and the voice rendering will, in the close future, be done using the first person's voice. So that will be your voice being translated. So that is quite impressive. But the aspect of that is that even involving human editing in that process to make sure about accuracy, this is done within seconds. So if you're happy with the lag, which most people will be, because that will be just very convenient to have that in your smartphone, that will be a segment of the market that will be conquered by MT as well, if it performs well. But with human double checking, it should. So that is one segment that will be slowly conquered also by MT. Okay, so now we come on to our fifth point, and now we'll be addressing the elephant in the room, which is quality translation in the purest of sense. So that's the process that usually somebody will go to a language service provider, which has a standardized approach, and will contact translators to do translation, editing, and so forth, and have a quality assurance process so that we get the utmost quality out of that process. So now we go into a quality setting. And machine translation is changing the way this process is done also for languages and domains where it is very effective. So we'll consider a few ways in which this is happening. So now let's talk about major corporations, big companies that have had translation needs over time for a long period of time. So they are big customers. They would have one LSP, and sometimes they would change, or sometimes they would stick with it. Now, what they can do with machine translation changes a bit. Things are done. Now, they can get all their translated material and use that to approach machine translation company to have a custom engine trained for them with their own material. So the machine translation will then output things that have their own vocabulary, their own way of explaining things, of talking to the public, etc. And starting from there are different approaches to that. For example, there are massive companies, let's say Amazon, Alibaba. They do their own machine translation. They will program these, and for some, they even let the machine translation get so good that they allow other people to connect to it, to use it for their own translation needs. So that exists. Now, if machine translation is not developed in-house, what they would do, they would approach a company, like we said, give their translation memories, their glossaries and stuff, and get that trained. So then what they can do is send their own text to the empty engine, get the translated text, and then send that to translators for editing. So that happens a lot. They could do that in-house if they have in-house translators. Now, that can be done also if they are using an LSP. So the LSP would then handle that either by connecting the LSP to the machine translation, or if the LSP has their own team programming machine translation. So that happens as well. Major LSPs, they can get a team to make machine translations and use that for specific customers, or use that for a specific segment of activity. Let's say, for example, automotive. So they can have these processes in. And what that implies for translators at every part of this process is that they don't get to do the first translation. They will get the translated material that has been machine translated, and they will need to edit it, sometimes make special comments or flag some specific errors that in turn, knowing this, will help the team to make the machine translation better. And they would do this using their CAD tools. So CAD tools are involved in that process. And that's important to mention, because in some processes, it will not be involved. So now, so far, it's talking about processes that are more or less classic, where your classical LSP or your end customer gets an empty engine custom made and gets that as the first part of the translation process. Now, what is happening as well, and that is very different, is that the machine translation provider, so those that have come up with a very good machine translation system, and that's the basis for the company, they themselves become the language service provider and compete with established language service providers. And what they do is they make the engine, and then they crowdsource. So the way this works is they will try to get new translators in, and they will not hire them on the basis of the academic education they have, degrees and that sort of things. They will give them language testing, and once they're approved, they will go into production. And companies that do that, so where the machine translation company becomes the language service provider, they will have their own set of tools. So regular CAD tools will likely not be used in that process, because they will build their own web translator platform where the translator will be able to post-edit the machine translation to make sure we get human quality out of it. But that doesn't stop here. Machine translation companies that become LSPs, because they want to have very fast processes, because they also develop like voice morphing tools like we discussed in the beginning, they also use an approach where they will produce translation apps that their linguists that they will have on board will install on their smartphones, and that will enable for super fast results. So for example, if somebody needs super fast translation, they will machine translate it, then split it in small chunks, send it to a whole lot of translators in small chunks, and they will get that on their smartphone. They will see the source, they will see the empty output, and then for them it's just a question of editing the output and sending it back. And that allows for super fast translation processes. And that is a very important aspect now. It's that machine translation will help to make translation turnaround really faster. So now we come to our sixth point. What can we take away from all of this? Well, MTs cannot replace humans at the moment, and that's for sure. To get good quality, you need human editing, and that's for sure. Now, what we've learned also is that small customers or one-time customers that are okay if they don't get like perfect quality out of a translation, they will go the easy way and use machine translation as a service from their desktop, from their apps on their smartphones, and they will keep using that. Now, translators, they already use MT to assist them to get translations done faster, as we know that we can connect to machine translations, Microsoft, Google, DeepL, and so forth. And the speed aspect is where it will change things, especially for LSPs. Now, as machine translation companies that become LSPs get more and more customers, and they have special processes to make it faster, we can see competition being in that aspect. So the speed of the translation process will now be an important thing, where if you get the first translation done by a machine, well, you don't have to find a translator to do it. And that makes things faster, especially if after that you make sure that human editing ensures the quality. And the quality is the most important aspect for human translators. That's where we make a difference. And now, as machine translation gets good, some LSPs, they will sometimes compare a translator output to what machine translation already does. And some translators that are not better than machine translation, well, they won't get jobs then for editing. So the way translators connect with LSPs will slowly be changing. It's already changing now. Machine translation is going to be very much a big part of the process for the languages where it's good and the domains where it's good, as we discussed in the beginning. This will do most of the time the first translation, and the human translator will do editing and quality assurance on that. So the utmost aspect for translators, as it always has been, will always be quality. So if translators focus on that, their translation quality skills, their writing skills, they will very much still have jobs. The way this will be done will be slightly different, but this will still happen. So here we are. Now you have that information. If you feel that this information is valuable to you, make it known, do the right thing, leave a like and subscribe now. And share that information with your friends and people that are interested in translation, so they can learn about that also. What I will do is I will also leave the comment section open under this video, so you can chat between yourselves, between professionals, and see how you feel about this and what is happening for you, how that affects you already. So that will be very interesting to look at that. I'll be looking in also to see your comments. And if you want to subscribe, well, you can do it right now, clicking here on this cliff. Okay, so that was very nice for me to share this information with you. I hope this will be useful, and I'll be talking to you in the next video. Happy translating!